Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Wow, it's a full room today. I think there's some students here, right? Ryerson, is it? No. Oh, well, do you want to talk about where they're from?
Yeah, I want to thank our friends from University of Toronto Scarborough from the environmental planning class. Thank you for being here today.
Welcome. Welcome to the friendliest, coziest, smartest, happiest committee in this building. So we are starting, it's actually the 25th meeting of Parks and Environment Committee today. So welcome to our members of committee, and actually we don't have any councillors visiting today, but welcome to staff as well, hardworking staff. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back, if you're familiar, provides real-time updates concerning where we are at in the agenda and what's coming next. And you can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. The agenda, the bulky, meaty agenda of 2 items, www.toronto.ca/council. And we want to, the Parks and Environment Committee gratefully acknowledges it is meeting on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and to many diverse Indigenous people. So we are now going through the agenda. Excuse me. As I said, it's a packed agenda. It's quality over quantity. PE 25.1, tree protection through the Committee of Adjustment process, and we are holding that for a presentation. Oh, sorry, before we do that, I'm doing the declaration, I'm jumping ahead, declaration of interest under the municipal code. And seeing none? Confirmation of minutes from our last committee meeting in January. Councillor Layton, Councillor Metlow, all in favor? Opposed? That carries. And why don't we just continue with the agenda, and then we'll go back for our presentations.
Madam Chair, I have a motion to add to the agenda.
Okay, so we're holding PE 25.1 for a presentation, PE 25.2, criteria for fuel, and biodiesel for the City of Toronto has some deputations. And we have a third item. Feel free to bring any other items you want for next agenda, but Councillor Layton has a third item, so can I have some move to add that to the agenda? Councillor Layton's going to do that. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. And we have some excitement. We have a couple presentations. So let me get my glasses for the fine print. All right. So I'm calling on Catherine Lawton and Saba Khan from Toronto Region Conservation Authority representatives and staff from the Office of Energy and Environment and Strategic Communications, who led the city's participation in the 2017 People Power Challenge. So we need Tamara, Hardra, Nancy, Dolores, Valerie, Cameron, and we're going to do a photo op up here. Congratulations on your award. Who wants to tell us a little bit about your award and what you did to get that? Yeah. Okay.
We participated in the 2017 People Power Challenge, which was a challenge among 15 organizations to get staff involved in sustainability efforts around the office. We ended up taking the big prize, which is what the check is about here. So we engaged, I forget the actual number.
Fantastic. All right. All right, thank you very much. That's amazing. It's always great when your hard work is rewarded, and we really are in awe of all that you do. Thank you. So the next presentation is actually, I guess, a bittersweet one. We have a gentleman here named Brian Mercer, if any of you know him. May or may not be my constituent. He's worked for the City of Toronto with urban forestry for under 18 years. Whoa. He must have started when he was 10. And he's moved progressively through different responsible positions, from supporting the Asian longhorn beetle eradication program to the latest assignment as manager, tree protection, and plan review. During his time, he's been a key contributor at many high-level projects, helping to advance the city's urban forestry management program. His knowledge and experience working with the policy and regulatory framework that guides urban forestry's activities, and his strong, super strong communication and customer service skills are among his best features. And he has, oh yes, so he's leaving us. Today is his last day, and he's going to greener pastures in St. John's, Newfoundland. So does anyone have any tissues? We want to give a big round of applause and wish you best of luck, Brian. And I think this committee will be going on a field trip to meet you there sometime.
Madam Speaker, I was just going to say that because I noticed that there is a coffee cup on the desk in front of Mr. Mercer, and I was going to say, if ever I'm in St. John, I'll meet you at the Rocket. The best coffee in the country.
All right. Thank you very much. So now we're going to start PE 25.1, tree protection through Committee of Adjustment process, with a presentation.
So maybe I'll just introduce the presentation, Madam Chair. So Jason Doyle and Daniel are going to do this presentation on the improvements that are noted in this report around the Committee of Adjustment process.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of council, our members of committee. So as for the record, I'm Jason Doyle, the Director of Urban Forestry. Beside me is, as we just send off, Brian Mercer, Manager, Tree Protection Plan Review. He's actually going to take in the job as City Forester in St. John's, Newfoundland. So taking a big role. And we've got Daniel Bovin. He's the Manager of Policy and Planning. Daniel will walk us through the presentation, and we'll be here for questions. The presentation was developed, and again, this report was in consultation with city building, planning, and legal. All right, I'll move it over.
City Council requested the General Manager, Parks, Forestry and Recreation, in consultation with the City Solicitor, the Chief Building Official, and the City Planner, to undertake a review of the Committee of Adjustment consent and minor variance review process as it relates to tree protection. The following presentation will provide a walkthrough of the decision-making process and some examples of how this process is applied. The City of Toronto Act grants authority to enact bylaws prohibiting or regulating the destruction or injury of trees. Policy with respect to the regulation, preservation, and enhancement of the urban forest also exists within the city's official plan, which envisions a balance between economic, social, and environmental factors. The Committee of Adjustment is a council-appointed citizen panel with delegated decision-making authority under the Planning Act. The panel must determine that the proposal meets the 4 tests shown there. It is the test under the official plan where the natural environmental factors such as trees, providing for their growing environment, and increasing tree canopy coverage must be considered by the Committee of Adjustment. The Planning Act provides authority to the Committee of Adjustment to impose conditions on any approval. All these conditions must be specific, enforceable, and directly related to the minor variance or consent being applied for. If conditions have been imposed on an approval, Toronto Building staff will require confirmation from the relevant division that a condition has been cleared prior to issuing a building permit. Building permit applicants are directed to a preliminary project review, which identifies whether the development proposal is compliant with local zoning. If the applicant's zoning is compliant, Toronto Buildings will also require further documentation related to the proposal. This includes a tree declaration form. The tree declaration's purpose is to draw attention to the provisions of the tree bylaws, including general information and related tree permitting information. Tree bylaws are not listed as applicable law under the Ontario Building Code. However, the issuance of a permit under the Building Code Act does not remove the obligation on the owner to obtain tree permits or other related permissions. If applicants do not meet zoning regulations, they are required to attend the Committee of Adjustment for approval prior to obtaining their building permit. Urban Forestry staff review every minor variance and consent to sever application. The review and response is specific to the site, and objections and conditions apply only to proposed variances or the consent that will impact trees protected under the tree bylaws. Urban Forestry staff either object to the application, request deferral, confirm that it has no objections, or that it has no objections subject to certain conditions. When Urban Forestry objects to a minor variance or consent application, a standalone memo is submitted to the Committee of Adjustment, which provides details about the impacts to existing trees and cites the relevant official plan policies supporting tree preservation and growth. The intention is to ensure that the committee is aware of the potential impacts to existing trees so that these impacts can be factored into their decision-making. The scenario shown here outlines a typical proposal for construction of a new single-family dwelling. The existing dwelling is shown in yellow hatching, and the as-of-right zoning is shown in red, with the actual proposal being shown in black. The tree is that green outline there, just south of the building. Although this development requires a minor variance, the tree is located within the as-of-right portion of the development. So through an advisory comment or the tree declaration only, the applicant will be directed to apply for a permit through Urban Forestry. Urban Forestry does not request a specific condition be imposed on a Committee of Adjustment application such as this. If the variances are granted, Urban Forestry would authorize removal of the tree by a permit under the private tree bylaw with applicable replanting conditions, as is consistent with the official plan. In this second example, the portion of the building that requires the variances will in fact impact the tree. In this case, Urban Forestry would object to the Committee of Adjustment and request denial of the application. If these variances are granted, despite Urban Forestry's objections, Urban Forestry would authorize removal of the tree by permit. In this third example, there is a development that requires a consent to sever one lot into two. The creation of the second lot will directly impact a healthy city-owned tree on the public boulevard, as shown by the blue hatch driveway. Urban Forestry would object to the Committee of Adjustment regarding this proposal and also advise the applicant that even if this consent or minor variances are approved, a permit to remove the subject city tree may not be issued by Urban Forestry. Urban Forestry may not issue the permit, and the applicant would be required to either modify their plans or appeal to the appropriate community council. Since early 2016, the above actions as outlined in the report have helped to standardize urban forestry's Committee of Adjustment review and commenting process, and improve customer service by ensuring that staff are providing defensible, specific, and consistent conditions in a timely manner. This, as well as other bylaw revisions, have resulted in a dramatic improvement in applicant response from over 7.5 weeks in 2015 to just over 2 weeks in 2017. Urban Forestry plans to continue to work with the individual committees to continue training and to ensure that the Committee of Adjustment decision impacts under the official plan are clearly understood, not only for the impacts of trees being removed, but also for the loss of healthy soils and the room to support long-term forest canopy growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything to add or any questions of the presenters? So, Councillor Carroll?
Okay. Yeah, I have some questions because there are some subtle changes that are going to happen, but I'm still a little frustrated because I don't know how far counter staff can go, and it really goes to the heart of why we moved the motion in the first place. We still have, when someone comes in with an application, the current practice does require them to present, there's a tree on this lot, it shows up in your drawing, and they present their tree protection plan. But we still have the problem of they may present and they may even say, and we're going to apply for a tree removal. It's not clear to us what gets said at the table there. Precedent would tell you that we are, as a council, rarely approving the removal of a tree now. And yet, at the counter, it doesn't seem as though they're getting the immediate comment, are you sure you want to apply with this drawing? Are you sure you don't want to go home and make some stylistic changes to your driveway? Because this council rarely approves the removal of a tree. And so they sort of say, thanks for the advice, I'm going to roll the dice. It doesn't feel as if they're being encouraged to really take a good look at their plan because they're going to have a hard time removing a tree. I wonder if you want to talk to that.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the council. Perhaps we could go to the slide that shows the process flow. It might help us understand how it works. When somebody says, I want to build something, they go through to check, see if it goes through a project alignment with zoning. So that they start off with building. If the project, let's assume, is in the as of right, building will give them a permit and they will give them a tree declaration, which requires them to come to our counter. At that point, our staff are suggesting you need an arborist report, you need this, you need that, they're making footprint changes. Unless the tree is in the as of right, we have no authority to deny the permit, so we issue the permit. We'll try and negotiate some type of redirect, but at the end of the day, they're not obligated to do so. If building finds out that it's outside of that as of right, there's a minor variance, it goes to this Committee of Adjustments. The Committee of Adjustments sends us the application. We go out and look at the site, we make comments, and at that point we make clear, specific comments that say we agree or disagree. Let's assume we disagree, we make that comment known to the C of A. So again, all the way through the process, the applicant is informed that healthy trees will be denied and through the process, through process flow. So to answer your question, they are given that opportunity, and certainly our staff do identify that their only alternative for appeal is to go through community council, and the record shows what community council and city council has done.
Okay, so follow up through you, Madam Chair. There's what you have to say and what you have to approve. Maybe it's a matter of training more than actually out and out changing the policy or even asking for a change to the building code. Are we allowed to train that to be proactive and preventative? Even if they apply saying, as of right, I'm making this Committee of Adjustment change application, I'm making this change to my property, and yeah, I'll protect this tree. Can we train for them to say, you know, if you're planning on coming back later to say, I want to remove the tree, I need to flag this for you now. We rarely see council approve a tree removal. So the proactively, preventatively, we avoid the scenario of staff having to go through a tree removal application, churning its way all the way through council because someone thought, I'm just going to roll the dice. Can we go beyond the places where we have to tell them things to preventatively saying, I see a tree here, just in case you were thinking of later on asking for its removal? Can we go that far in training?
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. I think part of our ongoing dialogue is consistent with ongoing training. So certainly what we'll try and do is draft something that's a little bit more articulate, that the Committee of Adjustments and Forestry staff are all saying the same thing to the applicant. And certainly I know there's ongoing direction for us to continue on with some training and some dialogue. So certainly we'll keep that into our thought process.
One more question, Madam Chair, if I've got enough time. Just a quick question.
You've got plenty of time.
Spoiled for choice. On page 9, the issue of whether or not we can ever take the City of Toronto tree protection bylaws and attach them to the building code. I'm sort of unclear about the comments here. The city can make a request. I'm unclear, however, it is unclear whether the ministry will agree or whether this change would result in improved tree protection for trees. I wonder if you want to go a little further with that. Why is it, if we got it attached to the building code, why are we unclear that that would be better?
Madam Chair, I'd like to defer that to legal.
All right.
To the acting chief building inspector, who's also here.
I believe the comment is that it's not clear whether or not the ministry would actually approve adding the City of Toronto tree bylaw as applicable law. And the comment with respect to whether or not it would make that much of a difference is regardless of whether or not the tree bylaw is applicable law, even if a building permit is issued, the applicant still has to comply with the tree bylaw. So the fact that the building permit is issued doesn't give permission to go ahead and cut down the trees.
So there's some technical lack of clarity, but you would submit, I think, that if we were to be able to attach it, there are lots of municipalities in Ontario that are envious of our tree bylaws, but they don't want to take the political risk. If we were to advocate that this really ought to be attached to the building code in Ontario, we would be helping those cities that wish they had this in place. And when you elevate it to the point of building code, aren't you much more likely to have an impact on the building and development community to understand that if they're buying a property, if they're looking at a site, the tree is the first problem and you better factor it in? Would we get that result from adding it to the building code?
So through you, Madam Chair, to respond, the building code defines what is applicable law, and it has very, very specific regulations that are considered applicable law that must be considered by the chief building official prior to issuing a building permit. And you must demonstrate compliance with all applicable law prior to the issuance of a building permit. The standard ones that people know of are zoning bylaws and conservation authority approvals and the like. And there's a myriad, there's a whole list of them. Private tree bylaws and city tree bylaws are not listed under the building code as applicable law. Mm-hmm. The city has asked the Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs in the past to consider inclusion of city tree bylaws as potential applicable laws as part of the regulations in the Ontario Building Code. However, the ministry has not agreed with our request in that regard and has decided not to add those particular bylaws, both private and public tree bylaws, to the list of applicable laws. Often making changes to the building code such as this, there is a considerable consultative process that occurs. I know that has occurred. I know there's been discussions on this, and at this point in time, the province is not interested in making those changes. That doesn't preclude us from asking again but we may not get any better results than we currently have. In the last committee I discussed this, the issuance of a building permit is a specific approval and right to allow construction to proceed. Having said that, there are a myriad of other bylaws that are listed that are applicable that aren't related to the building permit. So just because someone receives a building permit, that doesn't allow them to violate other bylaws and regulations that may be in place, either provincial or municipal. So, and that's made very clear through the process to our clients.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So Councillor Doucette had questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. On page 4, you have a very nice plan showing 3 trees, giving the circumference, all that wonderful stuff. And on all of your examples, it shows the trees. Are you not more familiar with this plan, which doesn't show a single tree on the property, and then when either your staff or my staff looks on Google Street, wow, there's an enormous tree in the back garden? Are you coming across that? And how do you, when you get this, or do you get this, how do you find out there actually is a big, beautiful tree there? What steps do you have to take right now?
Well, through you, Madam Chair, we followed the same process that Councillor Doucette has outlined initially, where we'll look online and we'll see what we can find. And we have some mapping tools that we can use to see if there are trees on the property or other issues we'd be concerned about. We also have each of these applications inspected. So if we're not sure or there appears there may be a tree, then we send an inspector to the site to confirm that, so we can provide an informed opinion there.
So you go out to every Committee of Adjustment application to look at to see if there is a tree, because we might not have been informed there is a tree?
That is correct, unless it's obvious that there is no tree or it's a request that doesn't really impact trees.
So, can I just add, Madam Chair, that's a recent process change. So council may be used to a process that we have followed 2 years ago, where we did not have the staff. Through the wisdom of council, you helped us redirect staff, realign resources. We've applied more resources. We worked with the Committee of Adjustments and Legal and Building to draft a sort of a team. So now, today, we hit 99% of those applications. In the past, we would put general conditions. It caused problems, and we held construction at bay until we were able to get there. So we do have the resources now to attend 99% of those sites.
Great, well, I'm happy to hear that, but I think it's still sad that you actually have to send someone out rather than the information being in front of us. But you'll be seeing I have a motion to that. You touched on it a little bit in your presentation. I understand that recently, for the first time possibly ever, you have actually gone and talked to the members of Committee of Adjustment and given them some workshop, I wouldn't say educate necessarily, but given them a workshop on the private tree bylaw, is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct. In 2017, I went and met with members of the Committee of Adjustment panel and educated them on the city's tree bylaws and how they apply to the decisions that they make, and just to make them aware of the impact of their decisions on trees. And we're hoping that that's something that can continue in future.
And would you also be prepared to do the same workshop to our new TLAB, the Toronto Local Appeal Board? Because if something goes from Committee of Adjustment now, it goes to TLAB. So would you be prepared to go and do the same education to those members so they understand the tree bylaws?
I personally won't be doing that.
I know
Jason
you
has just said we
we'll
can.
Call you back. We'll call you back.
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
So will Urban Forestry be prepared to do that?
Yes, and Jason says we can do that, yes.
Sounds good. I'm not going to go through all my motions, but I will speak to them when I speak. But you, just to confirm, you've seen all the motions I will be placing. You are okay with all the motions I will be placing. I'm not doing anything completely out of line.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we've taken a look at all of the motions. We're completely agreeable to those.
Thank you.
And I think the staff behind you want to comment on that question.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just want to add that at the Committee of Adjustment, one of the priorities of the last year or so, and certainly going into 2018, is the ramping up of training for the panel members. In fact, as what was referred to by the Urban Forestry staff, we held an all-day workshop last year, and one of the items was urban forestry. Also, one of the items was TLAB, and we had Ian Lord, the chair there. And this year, we're trying to build on that, and I met yesterday with all TRCA planning staff up in Vaughan at their head office about inviting them to interface with all the C of A panel members so that we can get better decisions, if that's the right word, out of the panels, more informed decisions on these types of sensitivities.
Thank you. So actually, I might have another quick few questions. I'm not sure if you're the person I should ask then.
I'm just mindful of the time, even though.
Okay. Oh, you put my time on. That's unfair.
For you, I do.
Thank you.
Former tree advocate.
I've lost my train of thought now. Committee of Adjustment. Don't worry. I've lost my train of thought. I'm okay.
If you remember it, I'll come back to you. So we have a visiting counselor. Councillor Fletcher's here, and she has some questions. Morning.
Good morning. I was watching on TV, and then that's why it took me a minute to come over. I just want to be clear about as of right, and that means what your as of right space on that lot is to build on. Am I right? Am I?
Through you, Madam
The
Chair.
lot coverage that's in the zoning.
Yeah, if I understand the question, various zone categories are going to have different regulations that apply to them, different lot coverage limits, different setback requirements. And someone can come in today, and it happens all the time, proposing, in this case, a house that meets all the zoning requirements. It's within the limits of the setback.
Right.
It's below the lot coverage limit, and they can go straight for building permit.
So if the lot coverage under the zoning and everything is 0.6, and the current house is 0.4, they can come in, have it at 0.6, meet the height, require everything. They don't have to go through. But if they want to double their lot size, what they're building on the lot to 2 times or whatever, now they have to go to the Committee of Adjustment.
So through you, Madam Chair, yeah, if a building permit application is made and it complies with the applicable zoning regulations, that is considered applicable
Yeah, I'm just,
law, and-
because we've heard as of right here,
Yeah, so
and
that-
I want to understand exactly what that is from a planning point of view.
Well, it's from a building permit perspective, right? In terms of when an applicant makes an application, if their proposal complies with the zoning bylaw as drafted and approved by council, then the chief building official is obligated to issue a building permit for that development. That is often called an as-of-right development. If the proposal requires minor variances, i.e. in some regard or some shape it doesn't comply with the zoning bylaw, then approval is needed by the Committee of Adjustment. In that process, urban forestry is advised, and they go out and take a look.
I'm trying to figure out for zoning that how many times does somebody come in to the Committee of Adjustment that is coming up only to their legal requirement that they have to build on their lot in a residential setting? I would think it would be very rare. They're usually increasing it significantly.
Through you, Madam Chair, nobody would come to the Committee of Adjustment that doesn't need a variance to the zoning bylaw. They would not be coming to the Committee of Adjustment for a tree issue on its own.
As of right, there's no requirement on the building. You're showing on page 8. There's the little part that's red, that anyone could build on that. That's assuming that the place they have is smaller than that. So I would say how many people, actually, I guess I'll ask Urban Forestry, this would not be very common. This does not happen very often. You don't get a lot of people coming in that are moving up to an as-of-right building.
Through you, Madam Chair, you're correct.
So
Councillor.
that's really shouldn't be, that's very atypical, right? In a residential setting.
No, with respect to that, we get numerous applications for either new single-family dwellings, additions and renovations to properties that are in full compliance with the zoning bylaws that are issued as the term as of right, without requiring minor variance applications. We issue approximately 30,000 building permit applications for renovations and addition, and only a small fraction of those go to Committee of Adjustment.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, to add to that, last year we received 4,600 applications at the Committee of Adjustment. but about 500 of those, 400 of those would have been consent. So we're talking in the range of 3,600, 3,800 applications required minor variances. And as Mario's mentioned, we literally get tens of thousands of actual applications for constructing new development.
Yes, but they might not impact a tree. You might just be putting, these would have had that. Okay, how many impact trees? How many applications last year had a tree lens that we had come in where we had to issue a letter or say something about the tree?
Through you, Madam Chair, unfortunately, Councillor, I don't have that information, but we can gather that through our tree maintenance program.
Because when I hear there's 4,600 C of A applications, 500 on consent, but of those 4,600, I'd be interested to know how many engaged urban forestry for comment because there was a tree on the property.
Through you, Madam Chair, anecdotally in Toronto East York, for example, there's roughly 5 to 10 applications that go through Committee of Adjustment in which Forestry provides a response because there might be tree impacts.
5 to 10 a year?
On a bi-weekly basis.
Yes.
So you could let us know, oh, this isn't going anywhere. I'd be very interested to know that number and how many applications are there? I guess you're saying that in different community council areas, there's just different things that happen. So if you're going to build something in a dense area of the city, you might run into a tree. If you're going to build something up in a less dense area and you have a large lot, you probably aren't going to run into a tree. So the 4,600 applications, do we have any idea what that breakdown? Well, first of all, we don't know the number of trees.
Yes.
And what the breakdown is by community council.
Through you, Madam Chair. We do have a rough idea. I would say it's rough, but about 1/3 or less of applications involve some form of review that relates to trees. The vast majority of the Committee of Adjustment applications do not involve tree issues. As mentioned by by urban forestry staff, they may do 8, 10 letters or pieces of correspondence to the committee per hearing. Our average number of items on a hearing is about 40, 41. So it gives you a sense of how many or what representation the tree issues are.
Thank you. I'm kind of interested by
Last question.
Community council area, and if I could get that information, I think that would be helpful to understand where the majority of written notices are about trees in the city, based on the number of applications to the Committee of Adjustment. So how could I get that undertaking?
Through you, Madam Chair, I could probably give you a rough idea right now that the tree issue is roughly proportional in all 4 districts in terms of what we see at the C of A. And in the 4 districts, our breakdown of volume is roughly around 35% for Toronto and East York District, 33% for North York, about 25% of all our applications are Etobicoke York, and about 12% are in Scarborough. And roughly for each of those districts, we see proportionally the same issues. It's just relative to the number of applications.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Doucette remembered her question, so I'll go back if anyone else, no other questions over here. Okay.
So my one quick question, we have an election coming up in October. After that election, City Council and our Civics Appointment Committee, if we're not correct, will be looking at the members of the Committee of Adjustment. Is that correct? So in 2019, we're going to be looking at who will be our new members on the Committee of Adjustment.
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct. Currently, there are 30 members of the Committee of Adjustment in 6 panels, and all of their terms expire on November 30th of this year.
And is it City Council who puts the criteria together as to the makeup of the committee and what experiences we require them to, or someone on that committee have when we elect our committees?
I haven't been myself involved in the process in the past, but I am this time talking to the CMO and the Public Appointments Office because we have issues with in terms of the number of members and the workload. But that's a review that the CMO primarily leads, and eventually all appointments come through to committee and council. And certainly with the C of A, they're appointed by bylaw eventually.
So I guess what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to add to the Committee of Adjustment and hopefully also TLAB that one of the criterias to get on the panel, someone has to have experience in urban forestry environmental planning. Right now, there's no experience of that type required to sit on either of these panels because we're just looking at built form. So I'm going to be putting a motion forward to do this. You don't think I have a problem asking for this to be added to the criteria when we select the new Committee of Adjustment members?
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly having that skill set or that background could only be beneficial.
Good.
But I'm not myself dealing with the job description per se of the panel members. It's done through the city manager's office.
Okay, perfect, but I'm not out of line, so that's great. Thank you. I'm doing good so far.
Thank you very much. All right, so that's it for questions of staff. And we have, I know Councillor Doucette, we've been working on some motions, so I think Councillor Doucette it's probably best if she spoke first. She has a bunch of motions. Well, actually, we will have our visiting councillor speak first and then bring it into committee.
Thank you. I have just on the ground noticed a number of changes, but if I've heard this right today, and we do deal with tree issues, and we have people who are concerned about taking trees down, and we don't allow a lot of trees down in the city. But the one thing that concerns me here is even if urban forestry says that design impacts a healthy tree and we would recommend against it, apparently now, if that is approved, there is an automatic tree removal associated with that. And I remember Bridgepoint, where there was a beautiful silver maple for the rezoning, and they had to rezone around it to maintain that tree. We've had to rezone around trees in Donmount, but it doesn't appear to me that that's the situation any longer, that there have been changes. What worries me with, well, I'll call situation number 2, where I would come in, have a drawing, urban forestry might say, you shouldn't remove that tree. Committee of Adjustment says, you can build that, and that requires tree removal. So my tree comes out. If I'm just a citizen and I wish to remove a tree, and I really, 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 really want that tree out, I can go to the Committee of Adjustment with a drawing. I can then get an approval to remove the tree through the Committee of Adjustment, even though I couldn't make it through the council process, which is to apply to remove the tree and then get told you can't, and then appeal it to community council and then still get told you can't. So there's a bit of a double standard here around those private trees that I actually now I'm quite concerned about that. And I'm concerned for people that are just following the rules. And Councillor Carroll said in North York that happens, where people come in with a design not to build something, but to get rid of a tree they've been wanting to cut down, or more than one tree that they're wanting to cut down. We're showing single trees on these designs. You could have 5 trees there. But once the Committee of Adjustment says you can build that deck, you can extend your home that number of feet in a minor variance, that means you can take those trees out. You never have to build something. You just have the ability to build that. So I think that that creates a certain unfairness with people that are trying to remove a tree that don't go through so many hoops. So that's the one thing I'm a little surprised about in this presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Doucette, and then followed by Councillor Carroll.
So I do have a rather long motion. Before I actually start with it, I just want to say that I want to thank staff. I also want to thank Oranda, who's here. She's a volunteer in my office. She's studying urban planning, and my protege Laura is studying forestry conservation. So I put the 2 ladies onto this, and that's why we have so many motions. I think a fresh pair of eyes has opened our eyes to several things, simple things we can do. So I'm going to go through these individually. I also just want to say that at our meeting, the chair was at the meeting, Councillor Glenda Bearmaker was at the meeting. I have reached out to Janet from LEAF, and we also had a very quick conversation with Councillor Fillion yesterday. So there's been a lot of different councillors and people go into these motions. So first of all, it's a very simple one, basically saying that we should be providing both Committee of Adjustment and TLAB with the most up-to-date city policies. Just recently, we did a city policy about changing whether you can appeal a front yard parking pad. We need to make sure that all of these restrictions and changes go to these appeal bodies. What I was just asking about, the next one is really just asking that when we are replacing our City Committee of Adjustment members and our TLAB members, that someone there, one of the criteria should be urban forestry, environment planning. I'm not saying everyone has to have that experience, but right now it's things like planner, something to do with the built form. We have no one sitting on any of these committees understanding the tree side of things. The next one is, as we've heard, it's already being done. I just wanted to put it in a motion so when Brian leaves, this doesn't fall through the cracks, that we do continue educating the Committee of Adjustment, and I'd like to add the TLAB, which I understand we're actually already starting, so that's brilliant. I do have concerns about our as of rights, but that's something I believe we can't actually do. So we're looking for a complete application. As I pointed out, this is an application we see quite frequently in my office where you get the plan, no tree mentioned, nowhere. And it's up to my staff and forestry staff to go on Google Street, thank goodness we have Google Street, or to visit the site to actually find there is a tree. We then contact forestry and say, you know, do you have an opinion about this? We believe that for a complete application, the owner should complete a tree declaration form, which says yes or no, we have trees. And they should actually provide photographs, because photographs speak 1,000 words, whether it's a twig or whether it's a 200-year-old oak tree. So we believe that should be there in the complete application, and trees which are protected must be identified on the plan. We think that will help everybody. For the tree replacement, I know that there is a sort of a 2-year mark where we check to see if a tree is still healthy. We believe some of the responsibility should be put back actually onto the owner and the person who planted the tree, and therefore they should send a photograph to forestry just showing the tree is alive and healthy. Again, trying to mean that forestry doesn't have to go out and inspect every single tree which has been planted. Tree protection barrier. Often our residents will call us and say, hey, the tree protection barrier is there, but everything is being stored, construction materials being stored within it. We are asking, I know we're asking a lot, we're asking other city departments who have to go to the development site to do some inspection, to actually, we'll provide them with a sheet explaining what a tree protection should be, what damage to a tree could look like, and we are requesting that they, within a timely fashion, contact 311, who will then pass it to urban forestry if they see an infraction happening. Because again, forestry doesn't have all the staff to go and check every single development site. We know we have city people out there, let's work together to protect our trees. Very quickly, the last two, 311, we want them to have the instruction that if a resident reports that something is happening right now with the tree protection zone, with a backhoe digging at the tree roots, it's usually a Friday night, a Saturday or a Sunday, that the resident doesn't get the message it will be inspected in 3-4 days, that they actually, that urgent matter, that urgent status is reported to the forestry staff who are on duty. And then finally, a very simple one, which thanks again to my wonderful young ladies who work in the office, help me in my office, they went onto the city website where you can apply to remove a tree or injure a tree, and nowhere was information about replacing trees. So it's this simple. Let's put on that section of the website, so you go in to apply for a permit to injure or remove a tree, And there's something there telling you about how you can replace a tree, what types of trees. That is on a different part of a city website. Let's put them onto one, makes it much easier, and it also shows people that we want you to replace the tree. So I know my time is up. I think I've covered every single item off. But thank you, everyone, for all your work on this. Thank you very much to Rwanda and for Laura in my office and city staff for helping us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's very comprehensive. Any questions of the mover of the motions? Councillor Matlow.
I'm at a disadvantage of our Roberts Rules process because I can't ask questions of staff after the motion, even though there are a number of items here that I don't know enough about, admittedly. So first of all, did you, in lieu of that, did you review all of the items that you're moving with city staff, and what was their take on each of the items?
So yes, we did review all of these with Forestry.
Yeah.
Clerks help us put it into a motion format. We have removed some. We had many more motions, and we have removed some because it wasn't feasible. And we were not looking to open up the private tree bylaw. We were just looking at protecting trees using all the different methods we could come up with, and some simple things, as you see, like having someone sitting on these appeal bodies who understand trees.
Well, on that one specifically, I love the idea and the principle of what you're moving. I've always thought that civically appointed bodies should be, the what you know rather than who you know, and it's a good principle. That being said, though, practically, the way you wrote it, the City Council amend the qualifications of Committee of Adjustment and Toronto local appeal body members to include knowledge of and background in. And that's where include knowledge of, I think, is completely reasonable. Background in, would that be inferred that they have a degree in, or what does that mean? Because the only concern I have is that we would even with a well-meaning request or direction, we would be restricting the pool so tight, unless, of course, all of these environmental planning students are willing to put up their hand and be on our Committee of Adjustment, that it just may not be practical. And I just wonder, have you considered that? And maybe we could think of words to not suggest that you need a degree in it, or...
So when people apply for our boards now, we have criteria which we're looking for.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that all of them have to have a degree. They could just have knowledge of. So I wanted to put it out there that instead of you having to be a planner or transportation or those, this is an experience, could be, as you say, could be knowledge of and or, I guess we could add an or in there.
The way I read it, though,
yeah, maybe we could just add the or.
It doesn't say like one or and or.
Yeah. So if we just add and or just or, would or instead of the and make? We're just trying to add a criteria to the list because right now.
The way I read this, it says basically that every one of them must have that background. And I just ask you, I guess my question to you is, and you don't have to do it this second, you can do it while others talk, is maybe we could work on wording that can have it as something that is a priority to us, but doesn't restrict it to only those who may have a degree, aka background in.
I understand what you're saying, but when you look at the criteria, when you're applying to a board, it says these are the kinds of experiences, skills we're looking for. That if you are applying, don't have to tick all those boxes.
Why don't we park it for a moment, let others speak, and then perhaps we can work with staff and.
No problem.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Good point. Councillor Carroll wants a question.
Yeah, a question of the mover. I know I've already made a friendly amendment, but now that I've heard the mover's answers, I think I might be able to help. I think, would it be possible to amend it to read that City Council amend the criteria for Committee of Adjustment and Toronto Local Appeal Body panels to include knowledge of and background in urban forestry? Because I think that's what I heard you answer, is that you just want to make sure that knowledge of or expertise is somewhere on the panel, not every member. That leaves the pool broad, but it gives the nominating panels something serious to think about.
Yeah. I have no problem with that. I'm not sure if...
Okay. I
Okay.
didn't write it down, but I think they got it. It would just be amend the criteria of Committee of Adjustment and Toronto Local Body panels and all the other wording the same.
Sure.
So take out the word
So,
members and
Councilor Matlow, we may have some wording over here, but, okay, great.
I have no problem with that at all.
So we'll look at that. Anyone else to speak? Oh, Councilor Carroll to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, I did just want to, just to let folks know, the other wording that I added to Councillor Doucette's motion was in 7 in terms of, because most residents, when they see the backhoe destroying a tree that's supposed to be being protected, they phone 311. And so I've put at the end of the sentence with urgent status, because it kind of bumps up what 311 does. 311 saying I'm going to notify Forestry means I'm going to send an email to the right address. Who knows when that email is looked at. With urgent status means we would like it to be lit up in red and ping and maybe have some glow-in-the-dark emojis jump off your page. Because if a contractor is ignoring a tree protection zone, in the space of 48 hours, he can kill that tree. And that is happening. Councillor Robinson couldn't be here today, but she could tell you some stories that would curl your hair. So that was my change, that and I guess the other one. So, Madam Speaker, I don't know if the students are at the point in their study yet where they know how important this is to us and why we're discussing it here and not in planning and growth. This came to us because the tree bylaw in the City of Toronto that was hard fought and hard won and groundbreaking in the world of planning anywhere in Canada is really about our desperate need to have a tree canopy. At the time the tree bylaw was put in place, we were looking at really entirely losing our tree canopy, especially in the inner suburbs where I represent. In Old North York, the policy at that time was buy a subdivision-sized piece of land from someone in the Argus Corporation. Most subdivisions started that way in North York. Clear-cut it, build on it, then throw in a bunch of trees after the fact. So all the trees are now the same age. Their end of life is at the same time, and a storm can just decimate a whole street. And so we have to have a different approach, and we're catching up to that. Other major cities have had the same problem, Chicago and such. I had to worry about this because it's not a popular bylaw. Residents didn't want to pass the tree bylaw, and in the span of about 18 months, we were asking people to give up control of what happens to trees in their backyards to the city and allow us to legislate that. And within the same 18 months, we said we're also going to start to legislate whether or not you can actually use insecticides on your lawn. And so the clarion cry, "It's my property," began. No, it's our environment. And that's why we're talking about this in this committee and not planning and growth. It is our environment. You are part of a society, and so is your little patch of land. And that's why we have to, in order to protect that environment, we need legislative control on your little private property. A resident said to me, "You can't tell me what to do on my property. What do you know about the environment? What do you know about cancer? I've had cancer 4 times. And that was when I got really brave about my environmental votes. Yes, I need to save this man who's had cancer 4 times from the 5th cancer. No pesticides, and we're saving your trees because we need some clean air for you, buddy. And have not looked back from those votes. And council in that time has become incredibly courageous, whether you are left or right or purple, with very few exceptions. I could go so far as to say, with 2 exceptions. This council saves trees. Out of 44 councillors, there's only 2 left who regularly vote to save trees. That is an amazing achievement in what, in politics, is a pretty short span of time. In my 15 years, we've gone from, I don't know if I can even vote to have a bylaw, to there are only 2 councillors left who regularly try to subvert that bylaw's great actions. That being said, The fact that we have gotten to that point, that amount of political oomph, doesn't seem to be getting across the counters. We still, in North York Community Council, and I dare say the other inner suburb councils, get shock and surprise that I can't cut down this tree because there's some pine needles and some sap in my swimming pool. So that's what today is about. We have to get to the point where the minute you apply, the counter staff are reflecting the environmental commitment and politics of this legislative body. I have some comfort from the report. Councillor Doucette's motion gives me more comfort, and that's why I'm supporting all of the above. Thanks, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. Councillor Matlow, I think you have a friendly amendment.
Thank you. Yeah, in full cooperation with the mover, I'm just moving a friendly amendment that writes that City Council recommend, and this based on our solicitor's advice, that the body of the Committee of Adjustment and local appeal body members have knowledge of urban forestry and environmental planning. And again, based on just staff advice on just how to structure that in a way that that helps. And really, personally, I wish I didn't have to actually move that amendment because I like the idea. And I also, I would add urban planning. I would add a number of qualifications to that. I'm sorry, Shelley, did you?
Do we want to let him finish speaking and then we'll okay. Okay, so just finish speaking, Councillor Matlow, and then we'll have questions of your amendment.
Happy to.
Thank you.
That being said, though, that's the aspirational, passionate side of me, and I know that we share that about tree protection. Then the pragmatic side of me kind of dips in there and says, well, you don't want to sort of unnecessarily or unintentionally restrict the talent pool out there with respect to civic appointments, when there are citizens out there that have other types of practical experience and planning experience as well that they bring to bear, where they have knowledge of the 4 tests, for example, maybe not as much about trees, but that's something they can learn. Just like each one of us, for example, when we were elected by our constituents, we've become at least pretend experts on many things that we didn't know before. So that being said, though, there's a number of recommendations here that I think are incredibly helpful. And I want to acknowledge Councillor Doucette in particular, along with so many councillors, but in particular, every time, and this is for the audience's knowledge too, every time a matter of tree protection comes up, or there's a concern that's a recommendation from a community council about removing a tree, Councillor Doucette is the first person to stand up and move that we protect it. And I don't know if you're officially or unofficially, but certainly our tree advocate in the City of Toronto, and I want to acknowledge that. That being said, I really just want to stop there and just explain sort of the rationale for that change. Overall, though, I support the motion, and I want to thank Councillor Doucette again for her leadership.
Thank you very much, Councillor Matlow. So we had Councillor Carroll wanted to question, I guess, the move of the amendment. Yeah,
I think the clerk is showing the appeal body panels. I made a slight change. The difficulty is we were coming up with wording while you were talking about wording, but the motion that you just moved still could be interpreted by clerks later on when we're not in the room as you mean every single member. What we want to make sure is that this is contained in the panel. I think that was the intent of your motion.
That's why I wrote the body of it rather than any individual member.
Right. The problem was where body was in the sentence was still leaving members hanging out there distinct and looking like you meant every member.
What do you suggest?
So we just moved where it is in your motion. I think if you read that, see if that is the intent.
So it's recommended the criteria of Committee of Adjustment.
Yeah, so that every panel would contain that expertise. But if we said your initial concern that every member reduces the pool, as you said.
Our intent was the same, and you moved
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now I think it could never be misinterpreted. What we're doing is giving the nominating panel the task of making sure it's contained. That's what your intent was.
So
I think we just demonstrated to the students exactly what the committee process is about. Once it gets to council, we're supposed to kind of have something baked, but this is about figuring out the I's and the T's and all that kind of stuff.
It was 3/4 baked. We're just
And it was.
That's ready to go in the oven.
Okay, we're there. All right. Anyone else to speak? Councillor Layton? Uh-oh.
I think we've kind of intentionally made this more complicated
Yep.
than it is. So I'm looking at the qualifications for the Committee of Adjustment, not public appointments process. And the way it's written, the only skill we say each panel needs is actually administrative and public speaking skills for the chair. So we don't say specifically you need to have someone with planning or law, legal or government. What the language is on the city's website is under the qualifications, you need to meet the general qualifications set out by the public appointments policy. And then it lists a couple sort of meta things and then says have knowledge in one or more areas of law, policy, architecture, government, economic development, community development, land development, and citizen advocacy. I suspect the intent was that's where you want to plug this in. So it should be listed as one of them. So whatever language that needs us to get there, let's just make it clear that by voting for this, the intent of the committee is for it to be included in that section, not as a standalone, you need... I'm not going to try to add any words.
All right.
I'm just going to suggest that it's understood by the clerks that are in the room, by our deputy city manager, by everyone in the corporation, that that's where it's
All right.
going.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I would do a little shout out to the students. Another amazing job to get at the City of Toronto is clerks. Because
yes,
they are
who
the
really run the city.
Behind the city, they know everything, they run it. We take credit, but they actually do it. I would just like to say that this is long overdue. It's great. It's a very fulsome conversation. We've had many meetings with staff who have been very helpful, and Councillor Doucette's intern and protege, where it's a great hands-on experiential learning for them. Put this in your portfolio for helping us out. It's trees. Nothing unites people, I think, in the world except like food and trees, and most people. And it's a big concern for our city. We are a city Toronto's a city within the park. It is every councillor is mostly worried about their trees and the tree canopy, as his staff, as our residents. So we get frustrated when we do see backhoes parked in the tree protection zones, or no tree protection zones, or debris from construction in the tree protection zones. So we're thrilled that departments are working together on that. And I would just say one of our motions that we did have in here that's not in here now, and I would just encourage councillors, maybe you do it already, is with regard to the tree replacement ratio. And, you know, it's 1-to-1 for a certain type and 3-to-1 for the other. And you might want to consider ramping that up on your own, 5-to-1 or whatever. I know that there is a story of a previous councillor, previous mayoral candidate, who he wanted, I think, to encapsulate the whole tree canopy, so he was trying to move for a 48-to-1 ratio. That's a little extreme, although it's for the trees, so just consider that, and that's up to your discretion. So having said that, thank you again to Councillor Doucette for all this, and to Bearmaker and the others as well. All in favor of Councillor Doucette's motion? Opposed? That carries. And the item as amended. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you so much. Item number 1 done. Item number 2, we have criteria for fuel and biodiesel for the City of Toronto. And we have some deputants listed. Let me get my list out. So we have 2 deputants. We have Aaron Freeman, and we have Dawn Monroe. So who would like to go first? All right, and for the students, so the deputants have 5 minutes to speak, and then we can ask them questions, and then we bring it into committee, and then that's the end of their speaking time. So if you want to speak on this item, you might be able to afterwards. Aaron Freeman, all right, you've been here before? Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee, and thanks again for providing me with the opportunity to address this issue. I'll focus my brief remarks on the issues that have been raised since your last meeting to avoid duplication, and specifically with regard to the staff report that's been tabled before you. We note that in the report there is a commitment that staff will issue a competitive call for the provision of fuel, including biodiesel, with a January 1 start date. However, we have several questions about what this process will entail, especially given the concerns expressed in the report that fly in the face of evidence from many other jurisdictions that successfully use biodiesel today. First and most importantly, the above wording from the report appears to be a call for all fuel types. So the language in the report being provision of fuel, including biodiesel. This would presumably include providing regular diesel. Such an outcome would, of course, provide no environmental benefit over the existing contract. Our recommendation, which I believe reflects the discussion in this committee as well as the objects of Transform TO, would be for the RFP to set a requirement to supply a minimum of B20 biodiesel as the fuel type that the city will use. There could be a provision to allow for a lower blend, for example B10, for the 4 coldest winter months. I would note, however, that Minnesota, which has colder winter temperatures than Toronto, uses B10 year-round and will be moving to B20 this year. Many other communities that we talked about last time, York Region, Guelph, Kingston, Ottawa, use a B20 blend, or in the case of Ottawa, are putting out an RFP for a B20 blend. But if you did want to be cautious, that's certainly one option, would be to go to the B10 for the 4 cold winter months. To ensure maximum value for the city and to address staff concerns about per litre price, the contract could specify a ceiling price set at the price level in the current fixed price contract for diesel. This would ensure that the city would not have to pay more than they currently do for fuel. This should fully address the staff concerns regarding the per litre cost. Staff also raise a concern regarding increased maintenance. However, according to studies by Transport Canada and others, as well as the experience of many municipalities and corporate fleets that use biodiesel, the only significant maintenance issue is with regard to filters. This has been easily solved by increasing the number of filter changes at the initial stage when existing vehicles first switch to biodiesel. So you'll recall that the issue here is that when you start using biodiesel in an existing engine, it essentially, in effect, cleans the engine components. The soot comes out, and more of that is captured by the filters. This does have a modest effect on improving vehicle performance, but it does have that impact where you have to change the filters a little bit more often. With regard to infrastructure and storage requirements, this is not an issue that has come up in other jurisdictions that use biodiesel. As noted by Transport Canada, biodiesel requires no new infrastructure investments either at the fueling facility or in the vehicle. Finally, staff should confirm that the competitive call will be an RFP process to supply biodiesel rather than an RFI, RFQ, EOI, or other process that's only designed to determine what the state of the market is. So in conclusion, to address staff concerns identified in the report and ensure that the procurement process is fair and delivers value for the city, we recommend that the committee pass a motion that includes the following provisions. Criteria, and this is in, all of this is in my written submission, so you'll have this in front of you. Criteria for a request for proposals to deliver diesel fuel for the City of Toronto's fleet shall specify that B20 biodiesel shall generally be the fuel supplied under the contract, with B10 to be supplied in the 4 coldest months of the year. The RFP shall further specify a ceiling price set at the price level in the city's current fixed price contract for diesel. I would also note that I've tabled a number of documents with the committee. One of those addresses a question that's been raised in another submission about engines, which engines are covered. It's an OEM list of approved brands, and you'll see that a majority of the brands on the market are covered, are warranted. It would not, in other words, a B20 would not affect the warranty for those vehicles, and you'll recognize many of the major brand names on the market. That list is actually 2 years old. It's I can get you an updated list, which would be much larger, somewhat larger. And the Transport Canada study that I mentioned, as well as some other data on biodiesel, is included in the submission. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present before you today, and I would welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the speaker? So that means you were very thorough and succinct. Take that as a compliment.
Or the alternative.
Not with this committee. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, and then we have our next speaker is Don Monroe. Don, have you been here before?
I have not.
Well, welcome. For your first time, we have clocks on one behind you and one over here, and I'll just reset it for your 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Don Monroe, and I'm the National Manager of Fuel Quality and Regulatory Affairs for Suncor Energy, your current fuel supplier. I am Suncor's voting member on the Fuel Committee of CGSB. This is a government-backed organization that sets consensus standards on a number of products, including fuels. I'm here today to provide you with some additional information on biodiesel blends in response to the committee's recent request. These are a viable fuel alternative for the city. However, if not sourced, handled carefully, they can be proved to be costly and disruptive to your operations. It's imperative that you move forward with exploring this fuel alternative. You select a supplier who will responsibly source, blend, and manage the product so you can maximize the benefits but minimize your risk. Suncor started blending biodiesel in 2005 here in Toronto, as a matter of fact. We now blend over 100 million litres a year across the country, including geographies as far north as Fort McMurray. We have a thorough understanding of the properties, customer and geographical challenges, and most importantly, the mitigation tactics required to ensure optimal operability. When I talk about Fort McMurray, it's 4 months a year we blend biodiesel there. 6 months in Edmonton, 6 months in Saskatoon, 6 months in Winnipeg. It's not year-round, except in Vancouver. Oh, and we have some in Toronto. Biodiesel is one of a number of biofuels, including the likes of ethanol, which I'm sure you're aware of. But unlike ethanol, biodiesel is not a commodity. Biodiesel quality is dependent on feedstock, manufacturing facilities, and each single batch. Producing biodiesel from any triglyceride feedstock, which is soy, canola, corn oil, is a relatively simple process. The challenge lies in making a biodiesel that doesn't cause quality or operational issues. There is an American standard, an ASTM standard, which I consider the minimum specification for something you could call biodiesel. Then there's a Canadian standard, the CGSB standard, designed to meet the Canadian market. And then above and beyond that, Suncor has its own standard, which is more stringent. In addition, after Suncor qualifies as a supplier, we send our quality audit team out to audit the facility, their processes, and their quality management system to ensure we're satisfied with their commitment to providing a high-quality product. Furthermore, once deliveries start, we do random samples to make sure they're meeting our qualifications. Okay. I need time for page turning. As pointed out, most new equipment can run on B5. That's 5% biodiesel, 95% conventional diesel. It is important to verify your capability of your current fleet and equipment before pursuing fuel options above 5%. OEM warranties will not support higher percentages. Environment Canada refers to anything above 5% of biodiesel as high renewable content fuel and requires users to be informed that they understand they are purchasing and acknowledge that they are knowledgeable customers. Suncor has overseen the transition of countless sites to biodiesel blends and very familiar with the steps should be taken to optimize, to minimize the operational difficulties during this transition. There are some one-time requirements that you will need to do, such as tank inspection, cleaning if required, change and filter on your dispensing equipment. There are also some changes to equipment maintenance schedules that need to be incorporated, including more frequent oil changes and fuel filter changes. One thing I want to emphasize here, biodiesel blends should never be used in a backup generator. Any equipment that's being stored more than 6 months should never have biodiesel in it. Biodiesel is hydrotropic, it starts to absorb water. It also starts to degrade or oxidize fairly quickly and has a relatively short lifespan. So 3 things to look for if you're thinking about biodiesel is feedstocks. Canola and soil feedstocks are preferred, even though biodiesel made from used grease or animal renderings may be less expensive, but they do tend to gel well above 0 Celsius and cause low temperature operability issues. Injection blended product. This ensures a homogeneous product in the distribution of your biodiesel within your truck. You don't end up with pockets of B30 and B40 and B0. Splash blended product, that's where one product is blended, is loaded on the truck, then the next product is loaded on the truck, and then jiggle mixed as it's haphazardly driven to wherever it's being delivered. Although if you don't fix the potholes, maybe it'll mix more, I don't know. That's not a good idea and does not meet CGSB best practices. And operational support. You need a supplier who actively manages the product. Suncor actively manages the biodiesel blend recipe every 2 weeks to ensure cold weather operability. In summary, biodiesel is not a commodity and not all biodiesel blends are created equal. The various suppliers have vastly different risk tolerances to the potential operational issues. To mitigate costly risk and optimize on operational efficiency, make sure you choose an experienced, responsible, and responsive supplier on the management of this product. I've included some links on the back. They're the CGSB standards for 100% biodiesel, blends of B1 to B5, and blends B5 to B20 that are all met with all the biodiesel producers, the fuel producers, governments, and users, all agreed on that consensus standard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe there's a question for you from Councillor Matlow.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So just to reiterate, you represent Suncor and you're the current supplier to the City of Toronto.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that you have a vested interest in keeping the status quo rather than supporting us considering perhaps another option.
I would suggest our sales team do, but I'm the quality manager. I'm only here for a technical reason.
You're here completely objective.
And I sit on CGSB, 51 of us sit in the meeting, and even worse than this council member, takes us forever to get anything done.
Well, thank you. Which option, in your opinion, given that you are an objective party, as you claim, is the more environmentally friendly option? Yours or biodiesel?
I think you've got to remember, biodiesel is not biodiesel, it's 5% biodiesel. So when you talk about how environmentally friendly it is, are we talking from a life cycle analysis?
Compared to yours?
Well, all I'm saying is we can supply you with 5% biodiesel as well, if that's what you're looking for. Right now, we do not meet the regulation in Ontario solely on the use of biodiesel. We use hydrotreated renewable diesel as well. So we have the requirements that we follow, and they have a reduction in carbon intensity. I tend to use acronyms.
And compared to what you are currently providing us with, is biodiesel more environmentally friendly or less or the same?
On a life cycle analysis, well to wheels, 5% biodiesel provides you with a less than 4%, but it's, let's say, around 4% reduction in carbon intensity, yes.
Thank you. You claimed earlier that we'd find that it would become very costly. If council specifically directed staff that the tender have a clear cap so that we contain the costs, and frankly, we just don't buy anything that's more costly than we want it to be, how then would it become more costly then if we've already restricted what the cost could be?
I think you misunderstood my statement.
Please.
I said that if you do not buy biodiesel from a supplier who is conscientious, buying a very good product, blending it properly, and delivering it properly, then you could end up with costly operational issues.
Okay.
I didn't say it was costing you anymore.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Layton has a question.
Thank you very much. And so just to follow up to one of your answers there, that you said the B5 that you currently provide has a 4% reduction over 100% petrol.
The regulation in Ontario requires a 4% reduction, a 4% renewable content with a 70% reduction in CI of that 4%. So that's what the regulation we need to meet in Ontario. There's a federal regulation as well that requires 2% renewable fuel, but that is less obviously than the Ontario one. So it's the Ontario one we meet.
And so if the B5 is our attempt at meeting that 4%, then if we were to move to B20, the CI would be?
Less again.
Pardon me?
Less again.
Less. Do you know how much?
So on a well-to-wheels basis, and assuming you're going to use the Ontario GH Genius, which is the method it's a model that tells you how much your carbon intensity reduction is. Biodiesel's around, if you buy tallow or animal renderings, it can get as low as 4 grams per megajoule. But on soy or canola, it's around between 10 and 15 grams per megajoule. And diesel fuel is about 87 grams per megajoule.
So can you translate that into English?
I can give you 2 things. One, the life cycle analysis basically says when you produce the fuel, you use this much energy, and then when you burn the fuel, you give this much CO2 off. It's the feedstock that gets you the difference.
Yeah.
So the feedstock for the product used in Toronto comes from North Dakota. So when you grow the soybeans in North Dakota, you absorb the CO2. That's where the reduction happened. And we bring it here, but we tend to think that CO2, really it's kind of funny, we tend to think CO2 doesn't cross borders, and that's why we want to do everything right here in Toronto. And yet, in reality, the CO2 reduction happened in another country. But overall, in a model, it tells us we have a reduction.
So, but going from B5 to B20, again, what would that reduction in the carbon intensity of us burning the fuel be?
Simple math is 5 times as much.
5 times as much.
Right, 20 times or 4 times as much. Even I can't do the math.
Okay.
Now, one thing I want to be careful with, I didn't mention that the 5% is what we give. 5% is what we give across the board in Winnipeg and Edmonton. The only place we do it year-round is Vancouver. So when everybody brings up about Minnesota and they're doing, which they're not, they're only doing 10% and 5% in the winter. But nevertheless, it doesn't really make any difference. The point is there's a whole bunch of things they don't have to do. The number 1 diesel, which is more used in your winter, does not require any bio in it. So there's a whole section of the diesel that doesn't need any. And then mines don't need it, and nuclear plants don't need it, and emergency equipment have that some leniency.
Presuming for this gelling issue that happens in colder weather.
Exactly.
But Minnesota are moving to the B20 in July?
Yes. B20 in the summer. They stay in B5 in the winter.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And so just back to one thing you said about Suncor and its operations and management. So is there a rating system for operators? It seems you're concerned that another operator would not be of the same level that Suncor is.
Well, first of all, I would say that's the reason for CGSB, the Canadian General Standards Boards. We set a Canadian standard, and that's the level you should meet to be, I would think, but it's not in law. You don't need to meet that standard, but it is, we're a voting member, and therefore we do meet it. But there's nothing that says you have to meet it. But what I'm referring, no, and so the answer to your, simple answer to your question is no, you can't go online and find who meets what. You can find out who's a CGSB member. That may help.
Okay, but, and presumably, you know, if the city went out, you know, we're going out to RFP, or we would be aware of that.
Well, this is
level
only my suggestion. You can write your RFP any way you want, but
Right.
I would put CGSB in it.
Okay.
There's a standard, a Canadian standard for the product. I would include that in your RFP. The standard also goes on to things like low temperature operability. So if you're trying to blend a B10 in the middle of winter, you're just not going to be able to meet the CGSB standard if you're doing that. And when the temperature goes down, do you remember at Christmas time, the minus 25? You may have lots of equipment that's not going anywhere.
And so, I mean, this is kind of separate, but do you know why, like, Minnesota's going to be 20 by July? So how are they able to do that? And we aren't.
So the Minnesota regulation is it's a farm subsidy. There's a lot of soybeans grown in Minnesota, and it's there to provide the input for the soybean industry. The soybean industry gets about 63 cents a bushel more for their product there because of the biodiesel regulation. So that's the driving factor before it. And if you go onto the website and even onto the Soybean Growers Association, it has a section telling you how to work with the B5 biodiesel in the middle of winter, and when you get gelling issues, to cut it with 50% kerosene, and that'll solve your problem. In Ontario, we don't make kerosene, so you're not going to be able to find that to cut the product with here. But that's their answer, and that's the people that are benefiting from it. I've included a link in my presentation as a letter that was sent to the the agricultural report to the legislature, and it talks about things that the city had to do to try to use the B5 biodiesel in the winter. And there's a lot of recommendations in there, including putting desiccant filters on all of your tankage. And they still had gelling issues, so they had to blend it with 50% Caro. These things never seem to get up into people talking about Minnesota. Minnesota can do this, Minnesota can do that, but the truth of the matter is Minnesota has lots of problems. As a matter of fact, and the warranties, we talked about warranties. Mercedes-Benz has made an announcement they're no longer going to put diesel cars into Minnesota. It's because they can't keep up with the warranties.
Okay, thanks. Okay. All right. Seeing no more questions, thank you very much. Questions of staff. Councillor Carroll.
Yes, so we've had these representatives come and speak to us today. I'm wondering if you want to go back to the first deputant. Our report speaks of getting to B20, but getting there by first receiving this study from U of T. But the first deputant quoted some studies. It looks like there is research already out there. So my question is this: if we wanted to move ahead now, if we wanted to, because the procurement is coming, if we wanted to give you that guideline in advance of the study, could we still get the study because it would help us with to address some of the issues? But could we also include in the RFP document that some of the operational issues that are freely disclosed by both representatives, could we include in the RFP that you have to include the ways you plan to address those issues?
Through you, Madam Chair. So yes, we are proceeding. The University of Toronto study is currently underway. We've had a number of discussions with the university. I believe they've also submitted a letter to the committee.
Yeah.
That details. And why we've done this, and you've heard the speakers today, is there's varying opinions and approaches, and some may be more testimonial than scientific. And the University of Toronto is an unbiased expert in this field, and we want their unbiased expert scientific research to provide us all of the information on the costs, operational issues, challenges, and benefits so that we can present that information back to yourselves. So initially, right off the top, if we went to, say, B20, as you've suggested, right off the top, based on the current contract, there would be a $6 million cost to the city. As touched on in the first speaker's information that he provided, he mentioned under lessons learned, there's biodiesel storage as a consideration, above ground tanks. Most of the city's fuel tanks are above ground storage, so that's a factor. Cleaning fuel storage tanks prior to filling with biodiesel, that's a factor. Brampton Transit experience, plugging and gelling of fuel filters. Yeah. In a group like Toronto Transit Commission, that's a significant factor, filter changes, ensuring that we don't have buses that aren't running. So we want to look at this holistically and provide all of that information back to yourselves to make an informed decision.
But is it possible to signal for the community that B20 is our goal, that the tender will go out with this study once completed, so that we'll be able to put language in the tender document that addresses the issues raised? But signal for them now, that's what they should be working on bidding on?
Certainly. So the last call, the current contract already has provisions for biodiesel from B1 to B100, so 1 to 100%. And so the provisions are already there. As of the city's green fleet plan, which encompasses all fleet, we are moving above the Ontario standard that was referenced to B5 by this summer. That's through a lot of discussions with Toronto Transit Commission, police, fire, paramedics, the city's fleets. We've come to an agreement that yes, we can go to that level. Anything beyond that requires some fairly in-depth research. And the University of Toronto in their letter have said there's a number of unique factors that need to be considered. And that's really important. Making decisions beyond that point based on testimonial or what might happen elsewhere isn't, it may be fine, but I don't guess, so.
Thank you very much. Any, Councillor Layton, questions of staff?
Yes, thank you. And this is just to the last sentence on page 3, that that will issue a competitive call for the provisions of fuel, including biofuel, with a Jan 1, 2019 start date. So that is the intent, to go all, like, maintain the existing B5 as an option in that tender, rather than ensure that we have the higher quality or the fuel with the lower GHG.
Through you, Madam Chair, and correct me if I misunderstood your question. Yes, so the new call will include biofuel options. We may also want to look at ethanol, for instance, which is another biofuel option. I specifically stated biodiesel because that was the question at committee today, so that it was clear that yes, biodiesel will. But
where it says a competitive call for provisions of fuel, so we're talking fuel that could have a lower quality than the higher, than a B10, we're not necessarily stating there must be an advancement in our greenhouse gas reduction efforts as a result of this.
So yes, there will be the regular fuel, so unleaded gasoline, diesel, dyed diesel, which is for off-road equipment, as well as regular diesel, and biodiesel, biofuel. And from that, there are actually two, and I believe the speakers touched on it, there are actually two levels of biodiesel. There's the regular biodiesel, and now what is becoming more common, which is hydrogenation-derived biodiesel. Mm-hmm. I'm not aware of any production within Canada. The physical properties of that diesel are more akin to diesel fuel in that you don't have the same gelling issues, cloud point issues, operational concerns. So it is a little bit better product. The environmental benefits appear to be similar. The actual benefits is the product of the U of T study.
And that U of T study will come back when?
So we intend to report back in Q2 2019. With those results, we could have potentially this fall, but of course that doesn't work timing-wise.
And when would the RFP for the fuel provisions come back? Because it's a pretty big contract. It's coming back to a committee.
That's correct. So that's where the original plan was to do that in 2020, so that would be in place 2020. We've moved that up where we would actually issue that call this year in 2018. It would come back in 2018 so that we could potentially have a contract in place 2019.
Through the chair, just because of the election year, the goal will be to try to get to the last government management committee before the break. However, if we can't meet that, then the bid award panel gets extended authority to be able to award a contract over $20 million. So that the timing is a bit of a concern for us, but we know that we could get a contract in place for January 1st.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much, Councillor Layton. So I think we're working on, I guess I would just say, you've seen my motion, and I was just wondering if for the B10, sorry, I'm trying to read that. Okay. You're okay with that? I was just looking at maybe we modify under A, B20 biodiesel shall generally be the fuel supplied under the contract with, and then it says B10 to be supplied in the 4 coldest months of the year. Maybe that's B5 to B10. I don't know if how you're comfortable with the motion. I know you had it this morning.
So through you, Madam Chair, quite honestly, to be comfortable with the motion, I am referring to what will be the University of Toronto study and the facts that provides. So whether it is B5 and B10, B10 and B20, I'm looking for the fact-based results on which to make that decision, because making a decision based on what may have worked elsewhere could result in operational issues. So okay. B5 we are absolutely comfortable with. Today, that's the direction we're moving. Beyond B5, that's where there's still some question.
And through the chair, just clear, we're putting out the call to get prices for B5 and B10 and B20 so that when we have the study in hand and get direction from committee and council, we know what all the costs are to move forward to that.
Yep.
Sure. Councillor Matt. Oh, sorry.
Just to add, so it's not just B5, it would be B6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's not just those whole numbers like that. Okay. It's any percentage from 1 to 100.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow, I'm going to let you come in. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think you know what we're doing. We're trying to push you perhaps beyond your comfort level to get to the direction that we believe is right. At the same time, we'd be irresponsible to be obtuse to relevant information that you're providing us with respect to potential cost escalations cited by U of T. So if the motion itself added in the line about, unless operational or additional cost concerns prohibit the use of high renewable fuels, does that allow for at least the sort of the kind of an insurance policy there that we're not asking you to do something that will end up being the wrong decision, but does it send you the message clearly that we want you to work to arrive at the destination that we believe we need to achieve?
Through Madam Chair, yeah, I completely understand where you're going, and you touched on the comfort zone. You're exactly right. B5, there is absolutely no cost to the city to increase to B5, which is over and above the current.
You refer to like storage.
Beyond that, again, operationally, I need the facts to answer that question truthfully. There's assumptions. So the one speaker mentioned 6 months. We absolutely do have fuel that we store in the city's parks and other areas where it might be in the tanks for more than 6 months. So for all intents and purposes, we might be throwing that fuel.
I love when city staff want to make decisions based on facts. So, or at least make recommendations.
Through the chair, and again, the report from the U of T, the study from U of T, the intention from Fleet Services is to report back to committee and council for the right direction with all this information on where to go.
Yeah.
Right?
But back to my initial question, like reading the motion as drafted, does this, in your opinion, find that balance, striking that balance of saying, this is where, based on all the facts and evidence that we know to be true today, this is the direction we want to go in, but we are not asking you to sort of just jump out the plane without a parachute, and if you come back to us and say, that there are genuine operational or additional costs that we haven't considered, such as some you've cited and some perhaps that U of T will perhaps provide us with, or maybe they'll come back and say, it's all good, we've figured out the storage concerns, et cetera. But does that give you that out if need be?
Through the chair, I think the issue I see from a procurement perspective is it would be unclear how we would base the award on. Because if we do not understand the additional costs and operational impacts, then we might choose to base the award on the B20 and then turn around and say, we have all these operational cost impacts and it may change who might have won. Like that produces a level of uncertainty in terms of how we would decide the winner of the contract before to award the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Do we want to stand this down for a minute and just break for a few minutes till we sort this out? Or
I have another, sure, do you want to take 5 minutes?
Okay, or did you, or, sorry, Councilor Layton.
There was a comment that earlier from staff that there may be a possibility of U of T coming back with the work faster. Is that, why isn't that in play?
So I've met with the University of Toronto, and yeah, just due to curriculum timing, we've accelerated it as fast as we can. It was already planned to be over 2 years. We've accelerated it to be completed by the end of 2018. So that's already been discussed.
So we're actually unable to complete the work this year.
Correct.
Is a 1 month deferral, would that impede your process at all? Or we just take 5 minutes now and just try and sort this out?
Yeah, if you want to discuss it, we can certainly have a quick discussion.
Okay, let's stand this down for 5 minutes. So recess, everyone, bathroom break, whatever you need.
Can you call to order? I'd be happy to.
All right, sorry. So we'll call this meeting back to order. Sorry, that was a long 5 minutes. As you can imagine, it is a immensely complicated topic. And Councillor Matlow, I think we maybe concur.
I think we have to probably arrive here, which is I'm going to move that we refer this item to the next cycle of this meeting, or this committee, the next meeting of this committee. And the reason I do this is simple. This is a lesson in we must always make fact-based decisions. And it's really easy to do that when the facts support the direction that you always want to go in. In fact, we encourage that, certainly in politics. But it's really difficult when you are learning facts, or you are not clear about the facts, or you are aware that there are facts still being investigated that are not in front of you, that may actually contradict your initial, or your conviction, where you want to go. That's where you struggle. But if you're honest with yourself, you cannot be obtuse to that reality. You have to accept it to be able to inform the decision you make. What I know is that each member of this committee wants the most environmentally friendly option. That is unanimous. And that we all share a view that we need to push our civil service, as I said earlier, and with respect, perhaps outside of their comfort level, to achieve a destination where we are procuring a type of fuel that is more environmentally friendly than what we have now. Eventually we will go electric, and eventually who knows what technology will happen in the world. But we're not there yet, so we've got to deal with what we have and what we have access to. So we were ready to move forward with the motion just to say do it. We are also learning that there are some facts that we need to consider to make sure that when we say do it, that we do it well. And over the next month, I know that there are some of us, led by our chair, who want to arrive at the kind of direction that will achieve our goal, that will move forward on an environmentally friendly option, while considering all the context that we need to consider to make sure that when we do it well. But I want to put staff on notice. Councillor Layton's initial request stands that this is where we're going. We're asking you to figure out how to get there in the right way. Where there are road bumps, you need to tell us, and you are. But we want to consider more environmentally friendly options, and we don't want to just hear why the status quo is where we're going to be forever. Our society would be very different if we didn't, consider more environmentally friendly options. So we need to move in that direction. So that is, that's the, again, respectful notice that we put you under, that we want to move in that direction. But we want to work with you over the next month to make sure that we don't unintentionally increase costs or do things that might affect operations in an adverse way. So we look forward to working with you on that and achieving a goal that you may not end up feeling comfortable with, but at least you can feel honest about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Matlow. Anyone else to speak? Councillor Carroll, and then Councillor Layton.
And I'm sorry to do this, but I have to do it because I'm not going to be here next month. And I dare say neither will be my replacement appointment. So I'm going to say that what I would prefer that we were doing today was moving a motion right now that we do extend our existing contract for 1 year, that we give staff the ability to deal with that. And I know that is painful to think of, because that means that we won't have the guideline we'd like to have for the whole year of 2019. I know that that's what that means. But I also know enough about procurement to know that if today you were to extend the option but to also make the clear statement from this committee and have council further ratify it, that the reason we're making that extension is because we are anticipating a U of T study that will allow us to include all the language and all of the cost adjustments necessary to create the best possible price on the longest term possible on an effective B20 strategy, that they would be willing to wait that year of academia's input into our work. That's why I wanted to move that motion, and I don't see why we need to wait a month. If that is the best way to get to a long-term study that allows us or a long-term contract that allows us to utilize all the input that we need, yes, it's painful to go an extra year, but we have that option, and by recognizing it, the savings and the environmental bang for buck that we may get out of the resulting contract, we might as well indicate to the sector today that that's our intention, and that this council is setting that intention right now, making it awfully hard for the next council to undo that intention. Because the sector would already be gearing up for it and getting ready to bid on what they know is coming down the pipe for them from the City of Toronto, which is, as we know, probably the largest and most generous contract they're going to get anywhere in this country on biodiesel. That's why I want to make that statement today. But as we wait for that and get those facts, that evidence, they've got to function. That's why I would prefer to be moving that motion today, but I know I'm alone in that regard. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So, I'm so sorry, Councillor Carroll, are you actually moving it or not moving it? Or?
I'm not, because I know that the will of the body is to do this next month when I'm not here, so enjoy that.
Okay. Councillor Layton to speak. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. This doesn't only go back to a motion that I moved last March, I think, but actually goes back to 2014 with our Green Fleet standards. There has been a number of years where we have taken no action on this particular element of a strategy the city has chosen to undertake to improve our environmental performance, specifically our own GHG emissions from what is the region's one of the region's largest emitters, transportation. And there just seems to be a reluctance to move forward, despite the fact that we see jurisdictions all around us moving forward and putting trust. I'm no engineer, but it took me about 5 minutes to pull up the Canadian standard for diesel fuels containing biodiesel, and to notice that while there are concerns, and they're noted in that standard, there are recommendations about how to address them, with very specific recommendations on how to address gelling and all of these other, the clogging of filters, that are pretty clear that someone in a position of authority has taken time to think about these things. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Jurisdictions all around us are working on this and making this shift. I've just been told that Ottawa is moving towards a 20%, a B20 standard. Perhaps not all year, and perhaps in keeping with all of these other recommendations that come from the Canadian, in this case, the Canadian National Standards of Canada. Sorry, what's put before us and extending and respectfully extending the contract another year do nothing to improve the environmental benefits or performance of our fleet for another year. And since 2014, we've had an opportunity to start looking at this, and we simply haven't taken it, which is why in 2016 I put the motion forward. And now we're here. Now, if we were to extend the contract, or even in this case, what's being proposed, we know what's going to happen. We all read it in the report. We see that if we open it up to everyone, someone's going to come in with a B5 and say, well, you don't have any additional costs, you don't have any risk, you don't, so we're going to grant another B5 for a year, is what's going to happen. And that means another year of us having not moved the yardsticks and made any headway. I appreciate that we don't have the U of T report in front of us, but there is a wealth of other information out there that I'm sure our colleagues in York Region, in Brampton, in Ottawa all accessed in order to get us to this point. So why we couldn't do that rather than relying so heavily on the University of Toronto is just a surprise to me. Given the 4 years that it's taken us to get to this point, it seems to me like this could have been accomplished faster. So I'll reluctantly adopt a referral because I think that we're not going to get anything better if we move forward now.
Thank you very much. And I would just say you can feel the frustration in the room, and so we will do the 1 month break so we can convene and have a proper, wholesome discussion with everyone at the table as best we can, and come to some, right, of course, and find some movement, because we know, we're feeling the report is not enough, and it's great that U of T is doing this study, and that's fantastic, and it's too bad the timing hasn't worked out the best for that, but we will embrace and acknowledge and read meticulously the information that U of T brings forward. But in the meantime, it's the heels seem to be being dragged. So we need to move forward. So we need to find something more than just the report. So looking to do that in the next month. All right, so all in favor of the deferral? Opposed? That carries. Motion to adjourn. Oh, sorry. Oh, right. I forgot about your item. The pink paper, Councillor Layton.
Yes, this is a recommendation to, despite what staff will no doubt reject the proposal for an off-leash in this location because we can't possibly meet any of the city's standards, we as a community would like to move forward with it. And I'll say I have 4 off-leash in my ward. I don't think any meet the standard. Simply because our standards are pretty hard to meet when you have parks in the downtown core. And this is around size of the off-leash, distance from the off-leash from houses. I don't think there's a single park in my ward, save maybe a tiny bit of Trinity Bellwoods Park, that would meet the distance requirements. And the reality is, dogs and children and people and ball playing don't mix. And so we need to, and there's more dogs than ever in our downtown communities and our vertical communities. We need to find solutions. We have money within our parks improvements budgets in this particular location. It's in pretty close proximity to Trinity Bellwoods Park, where there is also an off-leash, but then outside of the ward, further west, there isn't one. So it's difficult to go so hard against the opinions of staff, particularly on any items, notwithstanding the last one and this one. But in this particular case, we're just going to have to proceed with the design of it. So thank you. I hope I can get your support.
All in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Carroll.
Can I just make one comment? Sure. That the mover needn't preface his remarks with "in the downtown." North of the 401, I have 0 dog parks. Because of our criteria, no one will let me put one anywhere, not for lack of trying, up to and including a development social housing revitalization project. And I mentioned that it's social housing revitalization because you know how much consultation goes with that and how far and wide that goes. And everyone agreed that the park within that development should include an off-leash dog park. And now that we're under construction, our criteria is telling us we can't have it. We have 0 dog parks. So you needn't preface your remarks with "it's tough in the downtown."
I will withdraw.
It's tough all over. You may want to look at that criteria again.
I will withdraw that comment with reference to the downtown.
All right. And as the councillor for the ward with the most off-leash dog parks, I will move to support your motion. All in favor? Councillor Layton's motion. Opposed? That carries. Motion to adjourn. All right. All in favor? Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.